Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. We continue with our topic on evolution and Islam. In this lesson or video, we're going to be looking at the evidence of evolution, specifically doing an introduction, comparing the evidences for the rest of life sciences with that of evolution, and then looking at fossil evidence and the fossil record in particular. So when we look at life sciences or biology, the knowledge that we have there is through the scientific process. And we can verify the information. So if we take a common process, for example, photosynthesis, which has been taught in the schooling system through a number of grades, they know that the formula is carbon dioxide plus water with the assistance of sunlight. And when you have chlorophyll in the chloroplast, you're going to have this process occurring, and the products are oxygen and sugars such as glucose, and that will be stored as starch. Now, if a person says that they don't trust that photosynthesis occurs, or they want evidence or proof of photosynthesis occurring, then there's a number of experiments that you could do. You take a plant, if you measure the leaves, you can test them, and you can find that they have starch inside the stored form of glucose. You can then put it into a dark cupboard for 2 or 3 days. If you test after that, you'll find that the starch will no longer be there. The plant is destarched because it would have used up those sugars, because it would no longer be making the sugars on its own. Similarly, if we take a plant, and an aquatic plant, and we let it photosynthesize, we get oxygen being released as bubbles. We can do the test for oxygen and prove that the gas released during photosynthesis is oxygen. We can have a closed environment, and using specific chemicals, we can remove the carbon dioxide from the air, and then you'll find that a plant will no longer be able to photosynthesize. And in a similar way, we can have parts of the plant receiving light and others not receiving light, and we can prove that sunlight is essential for this process, right? So you'll find the information in life sciences is verifiable with evidence. Similarly, if we look at the human body anatomy, physiology, we can show with evidence that the different parts exist and how they function. You can use scans, you can use dissections, you can use x-rays, we can use sonars, and those will be able to show you the various parts of the body. You can look at the structures, the shape, etc. And then both at the macroscopic and the microscopic level. And then we can look at the functioning. There can be chemical analyses, and these can show you how these various parts function. Now, evolution is considered to be a theory and not a hypothesis by the scientists, and that would mean that it requires evidence. A hypothesis would not require much evidence, but a theory would be at a higher level and would require verified hypotheses and evidence for it. Now, we're going to find that obviously evolution is going to be different from the rest of life sciences, because in life sciences, we're dealing with living organisms, right? Biology, it's about life. Whereas evolution, you're going back in time, and you're going to be obviously looking now kind of at dead sciences and not life sciences, because those organisms wouldn't be existing now. So the issue with the evidence here is that the evidence is coming from a prehistoric time. It's something that you cannot, it's at a time when there wasn't written information. We're looking at hundreds of thousands of years ago, sometimes millions or billions of years ago. And in that time scale, there was no cameras, there was no written information. Humans weren't existing according to the scientific narrative. And that would mean that the opportunity to verify, no one will know 100% exactly what happened. Even the scientists, it's going to be based on what they've got there, and they're going to presume what happened to say what is the more likely scenario. If we look at the fossil record as being one form of evidence, right? So there are fossils that are being found of organisms, right? So thus, what does it mean? It means that that organism was alive at some point in time. And then if it's not found now, it's possibly had become extinct. And we find that, so that evidence shows you that these organisms lived a long time ago. What the evolutionists try to say is that it's showing evolution, the change of species. There should be transitional fossils that are in the process of changing, and then it change forms until you get the current forms. But is that exactly what the fossil record says? That's another question now, right? So what it does prove is that that organism was alive at some point in time. Does it show that that organism has changed? Because that's what evolution is saying. It's saying that there's been change in these species. Now, if we look at evolutionary theory also, it tells you that the fossil record has very few transitional fossils, right? According to what you'd expect from Darwin and natural selection gradualism, you'd expect to be having many transitional fossils in the process of changing from one species to another. But the reality is that there are very few of those, right? There's very few transitional species or fossils. And that's the whole reason why we had Gold and Eldridge coming up with the punctuated equilibrium theory to try and explain why there's a lack of transitional fossils. And that theory in evolution is trying to say that there's short periods of time where evolution and speciation happens, new species form very quickly, and there's no fossils of that process. And then there's long periods of time with no change, right? And if we look at the fossil record, you'll find that there's also living fossils. So you find certain organisms that are alive now, and we find fossils of those organisms that are millions of years old, 70 million years old, 300 and something million years old. And those organisms are seemingly unchanged. So that would be evidence that would kind of counter evolution, right? Where some people would say, but 300 million years went by, 70 million years went by, and this organism looks exactly the same. There's no change in that organism. So that would sometimes people could analyze the fossil record and come to the conclusion of creationism, to say that, or to deny evolution from the same evidence that they're using for evolution. I was reading another article online the other day, and it said something very interesting. If you're looking at the fossil record and you look at the geological time scale, there's something known as the Cambrian explosion. And if you read up about the Cambrian explosion, it's a period in time in the geological time scale. And in that period of time, they said that there was an explosion of species. Many different families and genera all just came about in a geological instant during this Cambrian explosion, where a whole lot of organisms came. And then there's a lot of stasis after that, where it was kind of constant. Now, that article was saying this account is more similar or more in conformity with creationism, that there weren't many organisms or any organisms, and then they were created in one go together. And then they also, that article linked it was actually from a Christian website, but their creation narrative is very similar to that of the Quranic one. And when they talked of the mass extinction, if you look at the geological timescale, you find that there's sometimes in a short period of time, more than 50% of the species became extinct at one go, right? And they link that with the floods of Nuh alayhi salam at that time, when so many organisms would have gone extinct in one go. Okay, so to sum up what we've said is that the evidence, the fact that there are fossils, would tell you that those organisms lived at some point. Does it show that those organisms have changed to become the current forms? No, that is a claim that requires proof on its own. So the evidence that is used by the evolutionists needs more evidence to prove the claim, right? And it could be interpreted in different ways. So we then said that Muslims would then attribute these fossils to being the creation of Allah, just like all of the other creation. And sometimes if we look at this information, to look and think that organisms as huge and powerful as dinosaurs existed at one time, and the fact that they don't exist at all now, like completely extinct, that would also be something for us to ponder about, to think that if such huge, powerful creations could be completely annihilated from the earth, then we too should be humbled by the power of the Almighty, that we too could be annihilated from the earth, and it's all in the control of Allah Ta'ala. Okay, so the next video, we're continuing with the evidences of evolution. We'll be looking at homologous structures as well as biogeography that are used as evidences of evolution. And we're going to see how analyze that evidence and say, how can we interpret that evidence?